The sky above New London was filled with fire when Captain Elijah Brooks came home. His ship, the Vigilant Dawn Asterisk, broke through the clouds like a glowing arrow. Crowds gathered on the landing fields below, cheering as his ship descended. To them, he was a hero. To him, it all felt empty. Victory was loud, but peace was always silent, and silence was what he missed most. Elijah had served in the long wars that spread across the stars. He had seen ships torn apart in darkness, friends lost to cold silence, and worlds turned into smoke. Oh, yes. Somehow he survived each battle. Not because he was lucky, but because he did not stop. He never stopped when he was hurt, when he was tired, when everything around him broke. That was why they called him unshakable. That was why the Queen herself sent for him. The Queen of Earth and the colonies ruled 1,000 worlds. She was not old, yet she carried an old sadness in her eyes. Her name was Amara. Every citizen knew her by sight, but not by truth. She was a face on glowing screens, a voice that told people to go forward when they were too scared. Now, she wanted to meet him. When Elijah stepped down the ramp, the air of the capital felt too rich to clean. After years breathing filtered air in metal corridors, the sweet scent of rain and oil made his chest heavy. Soldiers lined the path, their uniforms shining, their faces blank, nodded to no one. Behind him, his crew whispered in awe. They were honored, yet uneasy. Soldiers who lived through too many battles found it hard to believe in heroes anymore. A royal escort waited for Elijah. The officer in front, a young woman named Clara Davis, saluted him. "Captain Brooks," she said, "Her Majesty has requested your presence now," Elijah asked. "Yes, sir." He wanted to rest, to wash away the smoke of war, but toward the Queen he went. The journey through the palace was quiet. The corridors stretched like tunnels of glass and gold. Sunlight fell through the ceilings, catching dust in the air that looked like tiny stars. They led him through a massive gate, guarded by 2 silent soldiers. Inside, the audience hall opened wide, larger than any ship hangar he had seen. Light poured through a window so tall, it seemed to scrape the heavens. The floor reflected everything like water. At the end of the hall, on a raised platform, sat Queen Amara. She did not wear heavy jewels or gold. Her robe was simple, silver white, edged with blue. Her crown looked light enough to break. And when her eyes found him, they did not see a soldier. They saw something lost. Elijah bent one knee. "Your Majesty," he said. Her voice echoed softly. "Rise, Captain." He stood. The air between them grew still. She looked at him for a long while, as though trying to find the answer to a question she had not yet asked. "You have done much for the Empire," she said. "Many lives were saved because of you." "I only did my duty," he replied. "And yet," she said, leaning forward slightly, "your reports tell me you refused all honors." He nodded. "Yes, my queen." "May I ask why?" He looked past her at the window, where the sunlight poured through. For a moment, he saw himself in the reflection, another face lost in command. "Because freedom is my only reward. No title can give it, and none can take it from me." Her lips curved in something almost like a smile. "You speak as if you are not part of my people." "I serve humans," he said softly. "The ones who work, build, and dream." Her footsteps echoed on the shining floor as she approached him. The guard shifted but did not move. She stopped in front of him. "You speak boldly, Captain. Most men tremble in my presence." He said nothing. Then something unexpected happened. She reached out her hand, her fingers cool and light, wrapped around his wrist. The hall fell silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Her touch was not forceful, but it was full of meaning. He could feel her heartbeat, fast and unsteady, beneath her calm face. "Why do you refuse to touch me?" she asked in a quiet voice. Elijah felt the weight of 1,000 eyes.
Ice.
He knew what that question meant. It was more than the physical act. It was an offer of trust, or maybe challenge. He did not move. "The hand of a ruler," he said slowly, "should not be held by a man whose duty is only to fight her battles." For a moment, pain flickered across her face. Then she let go. The sound of her breath trembled just slightly before she said, "Perhaps, Captain, that is what makes you dangerous." He bowed again, his voice low. "Or human, my queen." Outside the high window, The city continued to roar with life, unaware that within these walls, a silent story had just begun. Two hearts, one heavy with power, one heavy with duty, had brushed against each other in a moment that no crown, no army, and no history could ever erase. And deep inside him, Elijah knew that something had shifted forever. The next morning, the palace was quiet. Elijah Brooks stood on a wide balcony looking down at the city below. Streets were alive again, full of movement, cars, and voices. He could almost forget the war that had ended only weeks ago, but duty did not allow forgetting. He was supposed to rest, but the palace felt like a trap of gold. His quarters were larger than any room he had lived in. He could hear soft music playing from the courtyard fountains and smelled the clean garden air. Yet his mind was restless. The words of the queen from the day before kept echoing inside him. The way she looked at him, the way she touched his wrist, and the question she had asked Hollivet refused to leave his head. Why did he refuse to touch her? He did not know anymore. At first he had said it was duty, but deep inside there was fear. Not fear of her power, but fear of what her touch made him feel. A guard knocked on the door. It was made with warm light and quiet color, a place for speaking, not ruling. Queen Amara stood by the window, without the crown this time. Her hair was tied in a simple braid, her white gown thin like morning light. She looked more like a woman than a ruler. "Captain," she said when she turned to him, "do not rest. I rest enough, my queen. Do you call that rest? You stare at the city like a man ready for another war." Elijah looked out through the glass beside her. Wars do not end for soldiers. They wait behind the silence. She studied him for a moment, then asked, "Do you hate peace?" "No," he said, "but I do not trust it." The queen walked closer. Her movements were graceful, but her voice carried something heavier. "The council says you saved 100,000 lives in the Battle of Europa. Do you know what they call you now? The Iron Captain? I have heard some of the names. None of them are mine." She smiled faintly. "You are difficult." "It is not difficulty," he said. "It is honesty." She moved closer again until she was only a short step from him. He could smell the faint scent of roses in her hair. "Yesterday," she said softly, "you made all of my advisors nervous. They said you insulted me when you refused to take my hand. It was not meant as insult." "Then what was it?" she asked, her eyes searching his face. Fear, pride, or something else? He stayed silent. He did not know how to answer. The queen folded her arms and looked out the window again. "You speak of freedom," she said. "You think because I sit on a throne, I have no freedom at all. But you don't see what it costs me to wear this crown. Each order I give steals another piece of me. I envy men like youth, the ones who can walk away." Her voice was steady, but her eyes glistened. Elijah saw, for the first time, the weight she carried. Behind the power was loneliness sharper than any blade. She turned back to him. "Do you know what I felt when I took your wrist yesterday?" Elijah shook his head slightly. "I felt a heartbeat stronger than my crown. You spoke to me like a man, not a subject. And for a moment, I was not a queen. I was just a woman. I don't know if I wanted to thank you or hate you for that." Her words struck him harder than any weapon ever had. For all his strength, he felt uncertain beneath her gaze. He said quietly, "I didn't mean to frighten you." "You didn't," she said. "It reminded me of something I lost a long time ago." Before he could respond, an officer entered the room hurriedly. "Your Majesty," the woman said, bowing. "There is unrest in the council chamber. Some are questioning your favor toward Captain Brooks." Amara's expression turned cold again, the softness gone, as if it never existed. "Tell them I will speak to them myself," she ordered. The officer bowed and left. After a long silence, she looked back at Elijah. "You see, Captain," she said quietly, "even a simple moment between two people becomes a matter of government." He gave a short nod. "That is why soldiers live far from palaces." She smiled again, but there was no joy in it. "And yet, here we are." As guards returned to escort her, she paused at the door. "Captain Brooks," she said, "when next I reach for your hand, think carefully before you refuse me again. Not every time will be in peace." He gave a small bow. "I will remember, my queen." When she left, Elijah remained alone in the hall. The city lights outside flickered as night came. He stared at his wrist, the place her fingers had touched in for the first time. He realized how deeply her touch had left its mark, not on his skin, but somewhere far deeper, where no war had ever reached. The palace did not sleep that night. Behind the shining walls, voices whispered and footsteps hurried through hidden corridors. The news had already spread that the queen favored a soldier more than the nobleman who sat in her council. In a place where every glance could turn into gossip and every silence could turn into danger, Captain Elijah Brooks had become the name that stirred both envy and anger. Elijah stayed in his room after midnight. He had taken off his uniform coat, but even in the plain shirt beneath, he still looked like a man ready to fight. He walked to the window, watching the lights of the city below blink like tiny stars. The streets looked peaceful, but he could almost feel how thin that peace really was. He knew the capital better now. Behind each noble promise and royal smile lived some kind of hunger. He heard a knock at the door. When he opened it, a young messenger bowed quickly. "Captain Brooks," the boy said, "Her Majesty asks that you join her in the courtyard garden." "At this hour?" Elijah asked. The boy nodded. "She said it is important." Elijah put on his coat and followed the narrow path that led from the east wing to the gardens. The palace at night was quiet, except for the soft hum of energy lights in the walls. The air smelled of the sea beyond the city, and the faint perfume of flowers kept alive by artificial warmth. When he reached the garden, Queen Amara was standing beside a small lake. Her white robe moved softly in the wind, and the reflection of the moon made her look like she was wrapped in light. She turned when she heard his steps. "Thank you for coming, Captain," she said. "I needed to speak to someone I can trust." "I am always at your service, my queen," Elijah said. She gave him a small smile. "You always say that. Yet you never say what you think." "I only speak when my words can change something," he replied. "Then speak now," she said. "Do you believe peace can last?" Elijah hesitated. "No, not like this. There are still powerful men who want war, because war gave them their titles and their gold, and will not settle for quiet lives." She sighed and looked at the lake. "I know what they plot, pretend to serve me, but they fear my rule, and now they fear you. They say my heart has been turned by a soldier." Elijah frowned. "If that rumor harms your rule, then I should leave." She turned back to him, shaking her head. "You think leaving solves everything? You forget that leaving also gives my enemies what they want. They want me alone. They want the people to see a lonely queen who depends only on cold advisors." He was silent for a long moment. Then he asked, "Why have you called me here if not to speak of war?" Her voice softened. "Because I wish to see the one man who never lies to me." She stepped closer. Her hand brushed against his arm, almost without thought. "Elijah," she said quietly, "when the worlds were burning, you stepped into the fire without fear. But here, in peace, you act as if everything around you could burn again. Is that what you believe will happen?" "Yes," he said at last. "Because humans forget too quickly. Peace makes them blind. But the fire always returns." "Then will you fight when it returns?" "I will," he said.
What?
"That is what I know." For a long moment they said nothing. Only the sound of the lake moved between them. The queen stepped even closer, until their reflections touched on the water. "When I look at you," she said softly, "I see something strange. You remind me of what I used to believe in before I learned how cruel the world could be." Her hand reached out again, slow and unsure. This time, Elijah did not move away. Her fingers rested against his wrist, warm and trembling. "You once refused to touch me," she said. "Will you still refuse now?" Elijah looked down at her hand, then up into her eyes. "If touching you means losing myself, then yes, I must still refuse." Her eyes darkened, but she did not withdraw. "And if touching me means saving me, then I already have," he said quietly. She took a slow breath and let her hand fall back to her side. "You speak in riddles, I speak in truth," he said. At that moment, footsteps came from behind the bushes. A guard ran toward them, panting. "Your Majesty," he said, "the council chambers have erupted in argument. Some of the lords accuse you of treason against your own bloodline." The queen's face hardened like stone. "By dawn," she said firmly, "I will face them." The guard bowed and hurried back. Elijah looked at her. "You know they will not stop even if you speak to them. They've already chosen their side." "I know," she said, "but I will not run." A queen must stand before her people, even if they wish to see her fall. He bowed his head. Then I will stand beside you." She smiled sadly. "You should not. Standing beside me will make you their target too." "I have been a target all my life," he answered. The moonlight touched both their faces, soft and cold. The queen raised her hand again for a brief instant, as if she wanted to say more, but then turned away. "Go, Captain," she said. "Rest while you can. Tomorrow will not be kind to either of us." He watched her walk back toward the palace gates. The white of her robe disappeared into the shadowed halls, leaving him alone by the lake, with only the reflection of the broken moon in the water watching him back. The next day began with thunder that was not from the sky, came from the heart of the palace, where angry voices rose from the council chamber. The great hall shook with the noise of strong men shouting over each other. King-like lords, ministers, and officers arguing about the queen's right to rule. Captain Elijah Brooks stood outside the large doors listening. He had been ordered to wait, but it was impossible not to hear. Inside, the queen's voice echoed again and again, calm but firm. "You accuse me of weakness," she said, "but strength without compassion is not strength at all." A rough voice shouted back, "You let a soldier whisper in your ear, and you call that compassion?" Elijah closed his eyes. He knew the voice of the noble Lord Carvon, a man who had once sacrificed thousands of soldiers to save his own fleet.
How that man dared to question mercy.
The storm of shouting went on. Suddenly, the doors flew open. Queen Amara stepped out, her face pale, but her eyes blazing. The council members followed behind, their faces grim and cold. When she saw Elijah, she stopped. "Captain," she said quietly, "come with me." He followed her through a side corridor, away from the crowd. They walked in silence until they reached the war room, an old chamber filled with maps of stars and planets. Dust hung in the air like quiet ghosts of the wars that once filled the space. Amara turned to him. "They mean to remove me," she said flatly. "They want me to sign over power to the council. If I refuse, they will claim I am unfit to lead." Elijah felt a strange fire rising in his chest. "And you believe they will stop at words?" Her eyes met his. "No. Words are how betrayal begins, but never how it ends." He paced a few steps, thinking. Then they plan more. "What are the guards doing?" "They're divided," she said. "Some are loyal to the throne, some to the council." The palace could turn into a battlefield before the sun sets. Outside the windows, black smoke began to rise from the lower streets. Elijah walked to the window. The sound of distant gunfire echoed faintly through the air. His face tightened. "They move faster than I thought," he said. "This is not politics anymore. This is war." Amara's hands trembled only slightly, hidden inside her sleeves. "I will not abandon my people." He turned to her. "If you stand here, you will die. They do not want justice. They want your blood." Her voice stayed steady. "Then I will give them my words before I give them my blood." Before Elijah could reply, the explosion came. It tore through one side of the palace with the roar of a falling mountain. The floor shook. The glass behind them shattered, raining shards across the room. Smoke poured in, and the alarms began to scream. Elijah grabbed the queen's arm, pulling her away from the broken wall. "They're attacking now," he shouted. "We have to move." Guards ran down the hallway, shouting orders. Some turned their guns on each other. The palace had fallen into chaos. Elijah led Amara through the back corridors where the smoke was thinner. The halls that had been bright and noble only yesterday were now filled with fear. As they ran, the queen looked at him with wide eyes. "You could still escape," she said breathlessly. "Find your ship and fly. Save yourself." He shook his head. "Not without you." They turned a corner and came face to face with 3 armed rebels in torn uniforms. Without a word, Elijah fired first. The sound of his gun cracked like thunder in the narrow hall. The rebels fell. Smoke curled around them like shadows of old battles. When the air fell silent again, the queen looked at him. "You have killed for me," she whispered. He met her gaze. "No," he said, "I have killed for peace. You just happened to stand in its path." They moved again, past the bodies, through another doorway that led into the hangar bay. The metal walls were lit with emergency lights that blinked red as alarms howled above. The smell of smoke and iron filled their lungs. The queen's once white robe was now marked with dust and blood, but her chin was lifted high. All that I built, she said quietly, is burning before my eyes. Elijah turned to her. Things can be rebuilt. People cannot. Come. He helped her climb the metal stairs to the upper level, where ships waited in silence. They found one small transport still working, its engines flickering weakly. Elijah checked the controls, then looked back. "It'll fly," he said. Before she stepped inside, Amara looked back at the palace. For a second, she seemed lost in memory. "My father ruled with fear," she said. "I wanted to rule with hope. Maybe I was foolish." Elijah stood beside her. Hope is the only kind of rule that deserves to survive. The sound of new explosions echoed closer. The queen turned to him. "If we leave, they will call me a coward." He nodded. "If you stay, they'll call you dead." Her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she stepped through the doorway of the ship. Elijah followed. The engines began to hum, loud and uneven but alive. The ship lifted off, shaking as it rose through smoke and flame. From the view below, the palace looked like a bright wound against the night, glowing, breaking, falling. As the city fell behind them, Amara stood by the window, her reflection pale and distant. Elijah watched her from the pilot's seat. She looked smaller than a queen and stronger than any ruler he had ever known. "You once said you served the people," she murmured. "But tonight, you have served me." He looked at her and said quietly, "Then perhaps the people and their queen are finally the same." Outside, the fiery clouds parted, revealing a thin line of dawn breaking over the distant horizon. It was a new day, though neither of them knew whether it would bring peace or another kind of war. The small ship flew through the heavy night with only one light shining on its front. The flames of the city slowly faded behind them until only darkness and stars surrounded the ship. Inside the cabin, everything was quiet, except for the sound of the engines. Queen Amara sat near the window, her face pale from both fear and exhaustion. Captain Elijah Brooks sat beside her, keeping his eyes on the controls. He did not speak for a long time. They had escaped the palace, but he knew the danger was not over. The rebels would not stop hunting them until she was caught or killed. The city, once full of celebration and peace, had become a place of war again. He had warned her it would happen. Still, she had refused to run until he forced her.
Ow.
Now that they were safe for a moment, the silence between them felt heavy. Finally, Amara spoke. "I never thought my own people would raise arms against me," Elijah answered without looking at her. "People who lust after power forget who gave it to them. They forget the cost." She sighed softly. "And what about you, Captain? You forget the cost of loyalty?" He shook his head. "Loyalty is the only thing that keeps me human." The queen turned her eyes toward him, her voice quieter. "Then why does your loyalty not allow you to look at me?" He finally looked up. Her eyes were tired, yet they still had that same fierce light he had seen the first day they met. "Because," he said, "looking at you makes me forget the walls between a soldier and a queen." A small, sad smile touched her lips. "Those walls have already fallen, Elijah. The moment you took my hand and led me out of the fire, you became part of my story." He looked down at his hands, remembering the light of the burning palace and the sound of her breath against his shoulder as they fled. "Then we both may have written the last page," he said quietly. The ship's alarms beeped softly, pulling him back to the present. A shadow appeared on the radar. "They're following us," he said. Her head lifted quickly. "Who?" "Rebel fighters," he said. "2 ships so far, maybe more." "Hold tight." He turned the controls and the small transport dived sharply down through a thin layer of cloud. Flames lit the sky behind them as the enemy ships fired. The queen gripped the edge of the chair, her knuckles white. Elijah's hands moved fast across the panels, pushing the engines beyond their limits. The sound of the blasts drew closer. One struck the tail of the small ship, making it shake violently. Sparks flew and the lights flickered. Smoke filled the cabin. Elijah didn't stop. "We can reach the mountains," he said. "Their radar won't follow us there." The queen said nothing. She closed her eyes and prayed silently, her lips moving but no sound coming out. After long minutes of flight and danger, the ship finally broke through the clouds. Below them stretched endless green fields and dark ridges of mountain stone. Elijah found a narrow valley and forced the ship to land. It hit the ground hard, bouncing once before sliding to a stop. The silence that followed was almost painful. Smoke rose from the back of the ship. Elijah unbuckled his belt and turned to her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "No, only shaken." He nodded and opened the hatch. Cool air rushed in, mixed with the smell of burning metal. Outside, the sky was colored by orange dawn. They stepped down from the ship and stood in the valley, the earth wet with dew. For the first time, there were no walls, no guards, no throne. Only a man and a woman standing in the ruins of their old lives. Amara looked at the broken ship and then at the far horizon. "What now, Captain? Where do we go from here?" Elijah stared into the distance. "Beyond those mountains are small towns that still believe in hope. If we reach them, we can rebuild from there." She smiled faintly. "You speak as if hope can be built like a house." "It can," he said, "if someone dares to start again." She stepped closer to him. "And will you dare, Elijah?" He looked into her eyes, then out at the morning light. "I have no throne, no orders left to follow. I can only be what I've always been, a man who stands between ruin and peace." She reached for him, her hand trembling. Her fingers wrapped around his wrist once again, just like before. The touch was warm, not commanding, but full of meaning. "And if peace no longer needs a soldier?" she asked softly. He looked at her hand, then at her face. "Then I will still stand," he said, "because someone must watch over the ones who carry peace." She did not reply. They stood silently as the wind moved through the valley, carrying the smell of grass and smoke. Far away, birds began to rise into the sky. The light of morning touched them both, soft but sure. The queen turned to look at him again. "You saved me, Elijah." "No," he replied. "You saved yourself. I only reminded you how to run." Her smile grew gentle. "And will you keep reminding me?" He gave a small nod. As long as I breathe, the wind blew stronger, and for a moment all sound faded except for the heartbeat of the new day. The world they had known was gone, but ahead lay open land, untamed and waiting. Together, they began to walk toward it, leaving the smoke and the broken ship behind. The queen no longer walked as a ruler. She walked as a woman who had seen loss and still chose to live. Beside her, Elijah walked not as a soldier, but as a man who had finally learned that touch need not mean surrender. And as the morning sun climbed higher, their shadows stretched long across the valley, marking the start of a story that no fire, crown, or war could ever destroy.